And welcome everyone on this Thursday afternoon in March. And the first order of business is for me to read the notice of electronic meeting due to COVID-19 state of emergency. The governor has declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the nature of this declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the Regional Transit Partnership to assemble in a single location. This meeting and the required public hearings will be held utilizing electronic virtual communication with the Zoom software application and in accordance with the virtual meeting procedures and policies as outlined in item 4.0-01 of the Virginia State Budget, House Bill 29, as effective April 24th, 2020. The meeting will be recorded and made available to the public at the tjpdc.org website. And when I read that date, April 24th, 2020, it really gives me pause. Been doing this for a long time now, haven't we? Anyway, with that, I'm going to ask Jessica to call out members. We'll take, we have to do a roll count to see who's here for the record. So Jessica, would you mind doing that for us, please? And if everyone could either raise their hand, assuming we can see you, or say or acknowledge that you're here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Diantha. We'll start with you, Diantha.
I am here. Thanks.
Lucas Ames.
I'm here.
B. Lepisto Kirtley.
I am here.
Lloyd Snook. Nakaya Walker.
Present.
Neil Sherman.
Here.
Randy Parker.
Here.
Becca White.
Here.
Garland Williams.
Here.
Karen Davis.
Here.
Jim Foley. He said he was going to be late.
Yeah,
He'll
he's
probably
going
be
to join
joining
us as he can.
Sandy Shackelford. Sandy was here. Sarah Pennington.
Present.
Sally LeBeau.
Here.
And that's it, Diantha.
Okay, and I do think Sandy's just stepped away for a minute. She'll be right back. So with that, our first order of business is to see if we have any public comment from the signups. Jessica, is there anybody that has signed up to speak?
No one has notified me ahead of time. Just one other thing, Lloyd is here. I just have to promote him to a panelist.
Oh, okay, great. We're glad he's here. And Lloyd will be joining us. So if there's no one who signed up to speak, then I'll move on to approval of the meeting minutes from February the 25th. And I believe Garland had a short, quick edit he wanted to make. Garland?
Yes, thank you, Diantha. Wanted to change in the minutes, the presentation that was given by Kinetics Group, that it reflect that it's a Charlottesville area transit presentation. That's just a small piece there that it's about Charlottesville area transit, and Kinetics just gave the presentation for us. Okay,
so with that change, that should read then the Kinetics presentation piece should read Charlottesville area transit presentation presented by Kinetics. Does that
correct?
Work? All right, so with that change, if there are no others, I'll entertain a motion to approve the February 25th minutes as amended.
This is Lucas, so moved.
Thank you, Lucas. And is there a second?
Second.
Second,
Second.
Randy.
Okay, second from Randy. And then all those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed?
I just have to abstain since I wasn't there.
Okay, abstentions would be Rebecca or Becca.
No left early.
Aya. All right, so we have 2 abstentions, I believe. All right, so the minutes have been approved, and the next item goes to, I believe, Jessica. It's our regional transit vision plan.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. All right, I'm gonna just do a little bit here. Okay, so at our February meeting, we discussed work products and deliverables that would be part of the regional transit vision plan scope of work. And in that discussion, it became clear that there were many unknowns regarding the involvement of the partnership, the transit agencies, and other interested parties. So what I hope to do today is to identify the committees and groups that will be involved in the visioning process, describe their roles in the process, and clarify the relative timeline of their involvement. And all of that is to give you a more complete picture of how we expect this whole process to work, to answer any lingering questions, and to get any additional feedback you may have. Also that we can send out the invitation for proposals or the RFP as soon as possible. And I will note that everything I'm about to present is stuff that was included in even greater detail in your packets. All right, so before the project even begins, we have our selection committee, and a reminder that the Regional Transit Vision Plan requires technical assistance from a consulting team. And the role of the selection committee is to review proposals from those firms that respond to the Vision Plan RFP, and then to recommend to the Regional Transit Partnership a preferred firm to complete the vision plan. And another reminder that last month, the RTP voted to appoint 6 individuals to this committee. And those 6 individuals and the organizations they're with are all listed in your memo. The timeline for the selection committee to be doing their work is really, really short. We will send out the RFP shortly. We will get our responses, and then the selection committee will meet in May to review those proposals and make their recommendation. And once they've made that recommendation to the RTP, our selection committee will disband, and that'll be the end of the selection committee. And then we have all these other groups that are going to be doing some work after the project really gets, doing the bulk of their work after the project really gets going. Let's see. So we have the official advisory group, which is you guys, the Regional Transit Partnership. We have a technical committee. There's going to be engagement of targeted engagement of different groups, and there'll be broader community engagement. So I'm going to take these one by one. And we'll begin by talking about the Regional Transit Partnership. And you guys, like I said, will function as the official advisory group. And the role of the RTP, what will you guys actually be doing? The voting and non-voting members of the partnership will guide the regional transit visioning process by advising on project components. So advising on the scope of work like you guys did in the last meeting. As we get going and there's work products in progress, you'll be advising on those things, talking directly to the consulting team. Additionally, voting members of the partnership will make decisions that further steer the visioning process, like what you did last meeting where you appointed the selection committee. And just to clarify, voting and non-voting members of the partnership will meet regularly with the chosen consulting team in your regular monthly meetings. So the timeline for the official advisory group, you've already really begun your work back in February when you made that decision to appoint the selection committee, and your work is going to continue all the way through the project to the very end, which we expect to be June 2022. Then we'll have a technical committee. So the purpose of this technical committee will be to support the chosen consulting team's efforts by providing technical information as needed. We're not sure if this is really going to be a standing group. It's going to be a bunch of different organizations that will join, leave, rejoin as needed. It's meant to be a very flexible committee that's providing a lot of the technical input as their expertise is required. So organizations that are likely to be represented at some point on this technical committee include CAT, JAUNT, Albemarle County and City of Charlottesville Student Transportation, University Transit Services, Planning and Development staff from the localities and UVA, Planning Commission liaisons, and TJPDC's Rural Transportation Advisory Committee, among others. So the technical committee won't really begin its work until the consulting team has been chosen and a kickoff meeting has happened. So that'll be late May 2021, and their work will also continue as needed throughout the project until the end, June 2022. There's also intended to be targeted engagement groups. So, and the purpose of interacting with these groups would be to provide unique and vital feedback from the perspective of agencies that serve existing or future users of public transportation. The way the scope is written, we're allowing the chosen consulting team to have some flexibility regarding how they'll engage with these groups. Maybe it'll be small workshops, maybe it'll be bigger workshops. We don't really know. We're leaving that up to the discretion of the consulting team. Organizations that will be invited to participate in this targeted engagement phase will represent the interests of historically underserved communities, large employers, housing, the environment, and others. The timeline for this group looks a lot like the technical committee. They won't begin work until the consulting team has been chosen, so late May. They'll continue as needed through the end of the project in June. Again, this is not going to be a standing group. It's really up to the consulting team to determine how they want to interact with these folks, but it's written to the scope of work that we want these interests included in the work products. And then we have broader community engagement. So we want to hear from all members of a regional community. We're going to ensure that the consulting team invites them to participate so that they can share their unique and vital feedback from an end user perspective. TJPDC staff and the chosen consulting team will engage with the general public in a variety of ways, including through an interactive website and through workshops. The timeline is just like that of the targeted engagement groups and the technical committee. They'll begin late May when the consulting team has been chosen, and they'll continue as needed through the end of the project. That's really it.
So Jessica, can we put up the folks' picture, the folks' faces again so that we can sort of, I can ask for questions and I can see if anybody has any questions. Because you have this presentation in your packet. We're happy to put up a page again if you need it, but are there any questions or concerns that you'd like to raise at this time?
This is Becca. I was just gonna ask, I know we've been talking about the scope both in the last meeting and then since the last meeting. Jessica, is there a place we can look for the final, well, and I know it won't be finalized until the consultant is chosen. But can you point me to the scope of work as it exists today?
Yes, we don't have it online. So what I need to do is share the most recent copy with you guys via email. I'll share it with the voting and non-voting members.
Thank you.
Great question, Becca. Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on this or? All right, then it may be that Jessica, we can move on to the next item.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
All right, so, and I'm just thinking out loud, we do have Garland here, of course, from CAT, and Jim Foley was going to join us a little bit later. Our next agenda item is the school and bus service updates. And we were thinking it might be nice to hear some updates on these transit providers because school is back in session now. There have been some changes, and so it would be nice for everybody to know. Garland, why don't you give us your update from the City of Charlottesville schools, and then if Jim Foley is able to come in later at the very end, we'll allow a little time for him to give his, but we'll start with you if that works.
Sure. So schools started, of course, and we started providing in-person transportation. Our numbers were limited because of the restrictions associated with 20 kids on a school bus, which limited our numbers to about 200 per.
We can barely hear you, Garland.
You can barely hear me?
That's better, yes.
All right, so what I was saying is we started school and we were able to provide our level of service, which was about transporting 200 kids per grade level. That kicked off. There were some issues in the beginning, of course. Parents that wanted to get their kids on the bus, like the first day, walked out to the bus stop with their kid, and of course weren't able to get on because it was by reservation only. So that kind of cleared up. It took a couple of days, but we're operating well now. There's been no issues, knock on wood. We've actually added 2 additional trips per the school's request in the morning and afternoon for the middle school. So that's been very well received. help with some overcrowding issues and allow some more kids to get to school in person. So I think it's been working well. We are actively working through the final stages of a contract. So we're hiring a headhunter firm to basically get us some school bus drivers. We're hoping to sign, well, that they're working through the last pieces of becoming a city vendor now. So we're hoping to be able to sign this contract by Friday of next week. That would be wonderful news if we can get that done.
Okay. Becca, looks like you have a question.
Garland, is that contract going to be written that it can be shared?
This is just for school bus drivers.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments for Garland regarding school transportation? All right, then I guess we'll move on and then we can come back to Jim if he joins us.
Mr. Pisto Kirkley had something?
I'm sorry? Oh, I didn't see B. I'm sorry. Excuse me, B.
That's okay. I was late raising my hand. Mr. Williams, could you please tell me, it looks like you're working with the school districts. And I don't know if CAT has smaller buses or if that's just a JAUNT thing.
So are you talking about on the CAT side or the school side?
Well, I know on the school side they have some, but I don't know on the CAT side.
So on the CAT side, we do have smaller vehicles, 29-foot or less size.
Okay. Because I know when I was talking with a school board member, they were saying how hard it was to get the kids back in school because of the fact that they had a social distance and such. So I'm glad to hear that you actually are working with the school district. And maybe some of the smaller buses can be used in the rural areas where you only pick up 1 or 2 children.
So our issues are, I just need drivers. We've got enough vehicles. So we're hoping to be able to flesh that out pretty soon. I know the school system actually reached out, I believe, to Karen and seeing if they could, help with some transportation issues. And I'll let David speak about that. But we are working with schools as much as on city schools as we possibly can, facilitate the maximum number of kids getting them to and from.
Thank you. Okay. No other questions.
Okay, anybody else? Questions? All right, we'll go on to the transit provider update, and Garland, you can put on your CAT hat and start with CAT, and then we'll move on to Becca and Karen. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So the presentation was last RTP meeting. I think it went over pretty well. We've gotten some good feedback from individuals who have seen this online. Based on the projected budget, we're making some changes, smaller changes to the system to get down to the funding level. Those should be able to, we're working through the final pieces. We're trying to make sure that we stay to the core principles of making sure we alleviate all of the, greater than 60-minute service model service routes, which is Route 4 and Route 9, at least get them to 60. We're doing some extensions. We're changing some of the, the components of the 7, extending it out to Walmart, so we'll do 7 days a week. We're moving the 12 from our system, which only operates on Sunday. So we're still trying to keep to the core principles of that. It looks like we'll be able to have final iterations that we'll be able to share with the public probably in another couple of weeks. We'll have to take these changes to the public for probably at least 2 rounds of public participation to meet our Title VI requirements. There's a Title VI analysis that will begin as soon as we get kind of final confirmations that the budgets are set from jurisdictions. So that's there's a write-up that we have to do that has to be given to City Council. as the governing board, they have to sign off on it. And once that is done, then we can actually kind of move forward. So all things are lining up. It looks like we're going to be able to do the majority of the service adjustments that we wanted to get done. And I would just say this is kind of the first iteration. This is kind of not the end all to be all, but this is the first round of what we need to kind of stem the tide and make sure that we don't have declining ridership, but we can turn it around and get our ridership back on track and improve. The other update I will give is we have an additional procurement that's going on right now for actively going on right now for our APCs, our automatic passenger counters. That hopefully will be done in about 2 weeks. If that's the case, then we should be able to start that process. It is a pretty lengthy process, so it's not just we get it done and it's, and put them in and it's all done. It's about an 8 to 10 month process, but it does get us in the path to actually where we'll be able to have it implemented, validated. Then we can go through the process with FTA to change our reporting standards from our fare box to the APCs, which will be a tremendous improvement and allow us to take advantage of the active ridership increases, which is a good thing for our finances and actually for the overall system improvements.
Right. And that will help us with the data that we've been needing for so long.
Absolutely.
Now, and did I hear another question from someone? I thought I heard some. Will you just clarify for me, because when you were talking the route numbers and the changes, I grabbed my handy dandy chart.
Yeah.
So very briefly, I heard 12, and I know that goes to Walmart, but would you just kind of go back and those changes, those routes, just a big picture, not exactly everywhere they go, but just to help us a little bit.
So the Route 12 is only a Sunday route. So it actually is designed to facilitate movement from downtown up to Walmart. So the thinking on the adjustments were the 7 and the 12 pretty much cover the same footprint, except for the 12 on Sundays goes out to the Walmart. So we're incorporating that northern portion of it, so it goes all the way to Walmart 7 days a week. So what you eliminate having to have the 12, which means it provides consistent service, and you don't have to worry about what day you are to figure out how to get to the Walmart. So that's the major improvement on that piece there. There are a number of other changes, like I said, on the 4, which is the Cherry Avenue, Harris Road route. That one has the frequencies are all over the place. So like in the early portion, it's like a 20-minute frequency or 23-minute frequency. Then it goes to like 10 o'clock to 45 minutes, and then it goes to 70 minutes, and then 23. So we are cutting all of that out and trying to make it much more consistent. So there is, at this point, contemplating doing basically a 60-minute service all day. That will make it easier for folks to use the service. And then if we have requests for additional service during the peak period, we can cost in what it would cost to put in kind of a tripper model during the peak period of time, but still keeping that 60-minute, which would, putting a tripper in would create a 30-minute model during the peak periods of time. But those are things that we're working through and seeing, where the funding is. So our budget, once it's set, it's set. It's not like we have a contingency fund that's sitting out there. So when it's built out, it's built out, and the adjustments after that will be kind of the year after.
Thank you. It's helpful, at least for me, when I know where those buses are going, as
Sure.
opposed to just the numbers. Are there any questions for Garland on the changes? All right, Becca, would you like to talk about UTS?
Sure. So on grounds, of course, our entire service area is in that last mile that people drive. So much of our demand is really based or aligns with parking demand. And so I just thought it'd be interesting to share that at the hospital, and Sally can help correct me on this one, but we're back up to about 90% of the pre-COVID demand for at the hospital. And of course, as you know, we transport those people that last mile. We intercept them in a big parking area and then shuttle them to their final destination. On the academic campus, we are creeping up, but it is still extremely low. We're back to about 55%-ish of the parking demand on grounds, and so many of the classes are still in not in person or hybrid, and such that whole class change thing isn't really, still is not happening. So we'll be running our COVID routes probably at least through July, and as we prepare for the fall semester and more that comes into view, we'll be more clear about it. But as the rest of this academic year, and as you know, on grounds, that's our transit is really, other than the employee shuttles, which never change, our academic routes do go by the academic calendar. So there, just to remind everyone, there is no spring break as traditionally known in the past, where we'd had 5 days straight of suspending classes. Those days are being spread out in hopes of people not traveling outside of the area and then coming back. So we only have a couple more days, one on the March 29th and one on April 15th. That's our version of spring break this year. For everyone else, you know, as it ebbs and flows, the academic courses last day of class will be May 6th. Last day of exams is May 15th. Graduation or final exercises, as they're called, is May 21st through the 23rd. And UVA made one announcement that, like, yeah, we're going to go virtual. And then, of course, as the governor has lifted some restrictions and redefined gatherings and events, UVA pulled back and said, okay, on April 2nd, we will announce what the final exercises will be like that weekend. They're, of course, engaging with the graduating class themselves, and really studying the new definitions of gatherings and what the governor's guidance and CDC and such. So just keep that in mind, you know, because it really does affect our transit, and it affects the region as these things unfold. So I'll let Sally jump in if she wanted to add anything, but that's those are my updates.
Sally, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't have anything. Becca covered it. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Are there any questions for Becca? Anyone have any questions? I would just like to, from my viewpoint, thank you for the spring break piece. That keeps our community safer, and I appreciate that. So, all right, then let's move to Karen Davis with JAUNT.
Thanks. And actually, Becca, thank you for the celebration piece too, because my daughter's getting her master's from Curry School this year. So I wasn't actually planning on attending her ceremony, but maybe there will be one, which is really exciting. So keep me posted, because she's not keeping me in the loop, obviously. So much like what Garland was mentioning, we're definitely in the throes of finalizing budgets and projecting ahead for the next fiscal year. Our ridership is starting to tick up, and we're putting more drivers out on the road. More of them are able to have a full schedule, although we are, you know, at reduced capacity. And we're actively keeping an eye on how COVID rules will change and impact transit, and also reopening the main office. More and more staff are starting to return as they are vaccinated. And of course, we still have strict protocols in place, but I know that there is a urgency to get back up and running and get back to the old ways. They just have to kind of keep them at bay till we get clear direction from the governor about that. We are excited. We have some projects coming up this year that we're really excited about. We are doing a facility study. For anyone who's been here, you know that we've completely outgrown our location. We're landlocked and can't possibly, when we all do come back, I don't know where everyone will park. We have absolutely no space. So that'll be exciting for us. One of our challenges is keeping an eye on the Crozet Connect service in particular. Right now, we're running what we're calling a holiday schedule. We didn't have the foresight to call it something cool like Garland did with the Lifeline program. If I could turn back time, I would have come up with a different name for that service. But we are, I've been in conversation with Becca, and we're going to do a survey of current riders and send out some ambassadors to ride the buses, speak with the passengers who are riding with us to get an idea of who's going to continue to telecommute, who's going to actually come in, and when that impact and service change will occur. Up until this point, we have pretty much changed our service structure to demand, and so we'll do the same in Crozet. It was such a shame because it was flourishing and growing so strong, and then COVID hit, and it's just like, oh gosh. But we'll see. I mean, I think if even if the employees work part-time or whatever, they'll be back on their service, and we're ready to go when that happens. I'm really excited that we're in the middle of a rebranding effort, and I think come late summer we'll be rolling out a new look on our buses, and some of you have noticed that now JAUNT is just a capital J, lowercase AUNT. We're just going with the word, as opposed to an acronym or anything else. And I think I'm very excited. We have a very talented public relations director on board, and she's doing some great work. So that'll be exciting. I think that's all I have.
Great. Any questions or comments for Karen? Yes, Garland.
It's not a question or a comment. It's just on top of Karen and I believe, are still contemplating in our 22 budgets operating fare free. Is that correct? So that's a big thing for the community. We want to make sure we get on record of saying that. For CAT, it's the CARES money and the American Rescue Plan money that's going to allow us to continue to go fare free.
Yes.
Which is huge.
Do you know how long how long are you all anticipating?
We have it in our numbers for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Because we would be able to use the remaining balance for the CARES and the American Rescue for the 3 year mark for 3 years, and that would be basically the footprint to allow us to do that.
That's great. And how about you, Karen?
Well, so that is something that I need to dig down, but I'm paralleling to what Garland is doing. And I do think, especially going fare free in this next year will really enable us to get our ridership back up and running. So I think for me, I want to put together a proposal and really engage all of you in Albemarle and Charlottesville in the discussions to make sure that we all understand. But Garland has already, and Neil can attest to it as well, that there are also grants available to help propel that into the future. So if we do it well, I think it could have a really positive impact. Not only is the cost of a fare kind of daunting, and we see that all the time at JAUNT, but it's also just knowing how to pay. Is there a pass? Is there a ticket? Is there cash? Is credit cards? When you take that barrier away for passengers, then everyone, the risk of trying to use transit, is so low, and people, why not get on the bus and see where it goes, And so I think it's really exciting if we can make this work.
Well, I remember this board had some discussion around fare free, recognizing that someone's paying, not the customer, right? But having said that, even pre-pandemic, we had, I think, some of those discussions. So,
I would just say the someone is paying. So in this case, it would definitely be the federal government using the CARES money to offset that cost. Is how CAT and I assume JAUNT is pulling that off. Especially for 22 and especially for us for 23, it becomes more of a nuanced after that. There are grants that we are looking at. We're working on doing a study to see whether it's feasible for CAT to go fare-free permanently. So that study will probably start in about, we keep my fingers crossed, in about less than 30 days.
Wow.
So that will help us be in line. There is a grant that the state has that's talking about potentially funding transit agencies, and that's what Karen was talking about, trying to figure out whether there's some coordination between the two organizations to do that, or maybe we do them separately and attack it and get more money for the regions that way. But that is a way for us to potentially tap into a resource to allow us to continue that model. It's not permanent, right? So the goal is, if we do get the funding, which I'm anticipating that we make a pretty good case to do so, that the increased ridership on the CAT side will help us to close that funding gap on the back end after a 5-year model. So that's the goal for us.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Very interesting. All right, with that, Jessica, I think we're back to you. We're going to talk about the work plan for 22, which is, I think, the roadmap that would begin July 1 of this summer. So I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Diantha. All right. So historically, the RTP's work has really been guided by the 2018 RTP strategic plan. But with the regional transit visioning process that we're undertaking, we're very near to completing the longer and shorter term action items identified by that strategic plan. So TJPDC staff would like to try creating a work plan for the RTP for the coming fiscal year. And it's like a roadmap for the RTP's activities and for our staff's commitments for the coming fiscal year. And the goals of the work plan would really be to complete the remaining actions identified in the 2018 strategic plan, to prepare the RTP for a new strategic planning process, and to ensure that all activities undertaken are consistent with the partnership's mission and are mutually beneficial to all of its members. So this work plan is intended to be similar to other work programs that the MPO and the PDC do. You're going to hear a little bit about our MPO work plan from Sandy later, but we just want to make our RTP work consistent with what we're doing in our other programs. All right, so we've kind of broken up this work plan into essential activities and optional activities. So first, I'm going to go over the essential activities. These are the things that we think really need to happen in order to ensure the continued success of the RTP. So first, we have program administration, then we have transit grant support, and then we have a lead in to a fiscal year 23 strategic plan. I'm going to go through these one by one, but again, a reminder that all of this info is in your packets. So first, activity 1, program administration. This is really just the day-to-day running of the RTP, making sure that the agendas and materials are there for all of our 11 meetings that we have planned for this calendar year, writing the minutes up, handling public participation, updating the committee websites, a lot of those really basic things to ensure that our meetings are a success. We also will work to share transportation-related information with voting and non-voting members of the RTP, local officials, the policy board and the commission meetings, and the general public. And what we're envisioning here is a lot of two-way communication. So maybe that looks like transit agencies wanting TJPDC staff to share information about efforts that you guys are doing on our social media, but it will also look like us trying to bring in the RTP into the MPO and the PDC's transportation planning processes. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that from Sandy as well after this. Activity 2 is transit grant support, and this is broken up into 2 sub-activities. So the first sub-activity is regional transit vision plan support. So this is for the big vision plan that we've been talking about, that we talked about earlier today. And our goal is just to facilitate the RTP's full participation in this whole planning process, ensuring that you guys fully get to fill your role of the official advisory group. Sub-activity 2B is identify transit funding opportunities and support transit funding applications. So staff will work to identify additional funding opportunities for transit, share those opportunities with the RTP, and support transit agencies and other eligible organizations in their funding applications. I know that you guys can do plenty of your own funding applications. What we want to do is offer support where possible. One thing that we're thinking of in particular is, in addition to the vision plan, our other DRPT grant is to look at expanded service for Albemarle County. And at the end of that plan, there's going to be an implementation plan. And what we want to do is ensure that the appropriate transit agency has everything that they need in order to immediately apply for funding in order to begin that service as soon as possible. So we want to be supportive there, and we're thinking specifically of that project, but also other things. And TJPDC staff will include the RTP in the SMART scale process. This is something new. This is, again, something you're going to hear about from Sandy later on in this meeting. We'll be specifically identifying transit projects that are eligible for SMART scale funding and seeking RTP input regarding transit related components of other projects that we are applying for. And lastly, activity 3, lastly out of the essential activities. So we want to we want to lead in to a potential fiscal year 23 strategic plan. So this is the next fiscal year. So in the coming fiscal year, we want to acknowledge that a new round of strategic planning is needed in fiscal year 23 to allow the RTP to refine and update its mission, vision, and goals. And TJPDC staff would spend the next fiscal year preparing for that by developing a scope of work for a new strategic planning process and develop an RFP for a third-party consultant to aid the partnership's strategic planning process. Okay, then there's the optional activities. So these are the things that they're just optional. They're additional things that we might have time to do. The TJPDC staff might have time to do. I just want to clarify that the way we've organized them here into activities and sub-activities, the sub-activities are just grouped by topic. We're not asking for you to like pick one from 4 and one from 5. We're really looking for broad feedback from the RTP on these optional activities. Which of these things are you interested in us doing? And is there anything that we're missing? So we'll get to that. But first, I'm going to go over what we've described here. So activity 4, broken down into 3 sub-activities. One of them is a spring Peer City virtual workshop series. So in the 2018 strategic plan, it was noted that the RTP wanted to do a peer visit to Blacksburg, Virginia, to look at their transit operations. We can't do that right now. So what we want to do is take a spin off of that and have staff establish a series of 3 virtual workshops, each with a peer city, with one of those cities being Blacksburg. And these workshops would be intended for the RTP members and the staff and leaders from the peer city to discuss their transit hurdles and successes and learn from each other. These would likely be part of your regular meeting, like a regular meeting, just like an hour at the end or something. Sub-activity 4B, ongoing transit as transportation informational series. We are not wedded to any of these titles for these informational series. It's just how we're describing them for now. So TJPDC staff would invite knowledgeable speakers to RTP meetings to share information regarding regional, state, and local transportation projects that may impact us locally. So examples of that might be hearing from someone who can describe the planned changes to East Coast Amtrak routes. We could hear more about details on ridership data from the Afton Express or something like that, or the ways in which transit is being addressed in a local transportation corridor study. Activity 4C is an ongoing transit and policy informational series. So in this case, staff would invite knowledgeable speakers to RTP meetings to share information regarding best practices to include transit in transit adjacent planning and policy, things like climate action plans or housing policy. How can we get, what can we do to better fit transit into those kinds of plans, better include it? And then activity 5, this is really a subcommittee wrap-up activity or subcommittee wrap-up activities. So there is work that the RTP has indicated is important to them, important to the members. We've started that work in subcommittees. We haven't finished it yet. So activity 5 would be potentially wrapping up either or both of those of those activities. So Equitable Driver Appreciation Project. Staff would work with the standing subcommittee on this topic to continue to gather information on transit agency driver compensation and appreciation, with the ultimate goal to create a public document to better inform potential hires, thus reducing turnover for transit agencies. And subactivity 5B is the Ridership Reporting Project. So staff would work with, again, the standing subcommittee on this topic to continue to gather info on transit ridership and other relevant metrics, with the ultimate goal to create a template for a periodically published report that allows the transit agencies to easily share and compare operations data in a meaningful way. And this report would also be available to the public. So that is it for my presentation. So we can look at each other. I will stop sharing my screen. And that's it.
All right, thank you. So I think today, Jessica, you're looking for some thoughts about how the committees and our committee feels about some of these options. And then this will come back to us again in April after you all hear our discussion.
Yes, that was really helpful, Diantha. So I'll just expand on that a little bit. So like I said, this work plan is something that we haven't done before. We want to put it in front of you so you know what we're trying to do for the coming year. The essential things are things we really think need to happen in order for you guys to continue to succeed. But the optional stuff is truly optional. And we want to know what it is the RTP members want to do. So we're willing to hear really broad feedback about what's of interest.
All right, so guys and girls, take it away. Who wants to start? Some comments and thoughts? I'm looking at the folks.
This would be added to the optionals work plan topics. And it's a shared thing potentially between all of us. And that's whether anybody's got, carbon reduction plans or fossil fuel free goals in the coming years, potentially working toward them jointly if we're able, or as a region. I know as the county and the city and everybody adopts some of these aspirational goals to be carbon neutral by 2030 and fossil fuel free by 2050, that, I don't know about you guys, but we already have buses in our fleet that are diesel buses that will be burdening that goal in 2030. So I would throw that out there, number one. And then I had a question about the funding opportunities. I think that was under your vital tasks. And there are a lot of grant opportunities for equipment that are electric or alternative. And so I guess I'd like to talk to you maybe separate from here or as a group, however you see fit, Jessica, to see about how, because none of us want to step on each other's toes about grant opportunities and who's eligible for the grants and, and all that stuff. But at the same time, if we could kind of keep us all in mind, including us, which we don't really go for grant money, but we would if it fit into the region's goals and didn't step on anybody else's toes.
Yeah, Rebecca, I think that is very much in line with what we were thinking for that essential work plan item, for that essential activity. So we, like you're saying, we don't want to step on toes either. We just want to make things available and share information that we're getting from DRPT and allow for that kind of collaboration that the RTP was intended to do.
And Becca, you make a really great point, and I think your statement around the carbon footprint and that really falls well into the sub-activity 4C, where we're talking about all of our climate action plans, right? And that would go very nicely. I think that would be a part of that that discussion. So opening it up again, anybody else have any comments? Karen, you're shaking your head. You want to?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, I think that's excellent. I'm glad Becca brought that up. And I also, I like hearing the language with, if we coordinate our structure and our purchasing and things on a matter like the climate action plans, et cetera, it's kind of one step forward to getting all of our services kind of coordinated and working together, as opposed to each of us worrying about our own silos. So I think that's really great. And as you know, I'm very interested in analyzing the pay equity for transit drivers. It's been on my radar ever since I've been in operations at JAUNT. So that's something it's very, very important to me. So I'm glad that that's included.
Okay, and I see Lloyd has leaned in. Lloyd, do you have something you want to say?
Well, partly I wanted to agree with Rebecca. It occurs to me both the city and the county have in the next month or two plans to have a further discussion of climate action planning. I don't know where exactly the county is. I'm not even sure where exactly the city is, but I'm aware that we're moving toward a report to council sometime soon. I imagine the same is happening with you all. And so one of the things that is a sort of a challenge in evaluating progress in climate change priorities is how we measure it, how we figure out whether we're doing better or not. So far, for example, I know in Charlottesville's case, virtually all of the improvement that we are able to brag about comes from, in our carbon footprint, comes from the fact that Dominion Power is using more alternative sources than they used to, or that they're using more natural gas than coal. Hardly something we should be proud of, although we get to talk about it as though, aren't we wonderful? Transit, there, of course, you know, we would hopefully be able to measure ridership and things like that, but that's sort of a, I mean, we're going to have to start resorting to proxies here to figure out where we can claim credit for what, because when we, hopefully, if we have more ridership, we might have a corresponding decrease in the amount of gasoline purchased in the Charlottesville Albemarle area, which is one of the other ways one could measure. And so one of the tasks that I hope that both the city and the county and perhaps the RTP or TJPDC can help with is to figure out what a truly intellectually honest way is to assess all of our progress on climate change, and to be able to assess the extent to which it is fair to brag about, for example, a reduction in carbon footprint because of transit, because we have been able to do certain other things. So that's probably under 4C, but it's a little bit more than just having an informational series. It really is a lot more coordination, it seems to me, and kind of sitting down with one another and brainstorming what's a fair way, what's an accurate way, an intellectually honest way to make these assessments. I don't know how the county folks are doing with their figuring out how they're going to measure progress, but that's something that I think county, city, university, RTP, everybody should have a lot to say about what's intellectually honest to claim.
Okay, Trevor, do you want to speak a little bit to that, to what Lloyd's talking about as far as our, not to put you on the spot, sorry, but.
Well, I'm not sure about the intellectually honest piece that Lloyd is referencing. I can say that the first phase of the climate action plan has been reviewed and approved by the board late last year. We have funding set aside, some projects underway that are in supporting of those goals. And then the staff will be returning to the board, you know, post budget, probably late spring, early summer, to talk about, you know, the continued work. We are rebaselining, which I think is what we'll be tying our metrics back to, and that work should be done. So that's underway. I do think there will be further discussions. I think for what may be, you know, relevant for this group would be at a future work session, kind of in the context of the work plan, having the key leads from UVA and the city and the county to come in and share what we're doing with our plans, you know, where there is overlap or where there is some continuity to it.
Yeah, I think that might be, and Lloyd, that gets a little bit at what you're saying. I think it might be very helpful for this group to be able to do that. maybe once the city has determined their plan, and we could, see how they mesh together, I guess is what I'm saying, especially around transit and transportation.
Well, since obviously this group being the regional transit
Mhm.
partnership, we have a natural desire to have city and
Sure.
county university all
Yeah.
working together. But it's just a classic example of something where we all ought to be not just simply on similar pages, but on exactly the identical.
Well, that's right. Yeah. But our timing may be off slightly. It's just.
Yeah, off by a few months, but I mean, frankly, when I saw the county's first draft of the plan, the draft you all approved last winter, last fall, whenever it was, my immediate reaction was to suggest to the city folks, just go substitute the word Charlottesville instead of the word Albemarle, because it was a really good plan. I mean, there's not much there I would want to disagree with.
Well, it would be it'd be great to have an agenda item or so around this very topic and to get, to share, right?
Yep.
Oh, Garland, yes.
So I think this is a really helpful discussion, and I think that we need to spend some time really working through what it means for transit to kind of adopt this model. Because when you are talking about transit, there are federal standards that we've got to get through. There are, the issues of reliability we've got to work through. There are infrastructure concerns we got to get through, and with the changing of, and this might be appropriate time for Neil and I had a conversation about STP dollars not being able to be flexed over for capital projects for smaller transit agencies. That potentially causes an issue for the infrastructure components for us for alternative fuel vehicle to get that infrastructure put in place. So those are things we really need to kind of hone in and discuss. And we can all see what the market is moving towards the EV model, understand it. But the real push right now is on the light trucks, small vehicles. It's not really on the big bus side yet. It is coming. Patera has kind of a monopoly on the market right now. There are other vehicles that are coming probably in a year or so. I would say, Gillick's got a product that's coming. It hasn't been to Altoona yet, but it's really getting close. But there are still issues of whether we're getting the full charge, and because of topography issues, whether it has the power to do what's necessary to be able to sustain it for an all day. So those are things when we're talking about having a reliable system and improving our carbon footprint. It's great to have the vehicle, but if it's not going to run, it doesn't mean anything. So we need to really think about, work through that. And, we're not talking about implementing it potentially tomorrow. There's a scale, right? So in 5 years, the technology is going to be a lot better than it is today. So I'm just saying, I know it's on my radar, it's on everybody's radar, but I'm just saying at this point, I think if you're asking me, I'm going to advise the council that I think our first step would be to go out and say publicly, we're not going to buy any more diesel vehicles after a certain point in time. That would be kind of step one. What that interim is, and I don't think it's an interim. I think, I'm not a person who likes to put all my eggs in one basket, so I would never really want to go to a fully EV model, period. Because if charging stations go down, substations go down, you can't operate. So we need to figure out what makes sense for us and for this region.
Great points. And yeah, I think your hand was up. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So actually, I agree with what Lloyd has said. And but no, you cannot take our document and just white out Charlottesville and put Albemarle. At least change a couple other words, and then you're okay. But I did want to ask Garland, are we looking into, because I hear you saying you don't want to go completely EV because of the fact that some charging stations could go down and everything, maybe in a storm or whatever because of our weather here. Are we looking into, or have you looked into CNG, LNG? buses? Is that something that we could possibly go to in an interim of maybe, I don't know, 10 years that you could then transfer over to EV?
Great point, and I'm glad you look like you're reading my notes. So I've been pushing that model, and Ms. McKeel and I have had this conversation. I think it's a perfect step for us is to put CNG in place, do away with diesel, and then as the market gets better and the reliability on the EV, then we would have half our fleet CNG and half our fleet EV. It really does lower our footprint, and it allows us to have the reliability component that we need in case there are issues, whether it's on the CNG side or the EV side. We're not honing on just one type of fuel.
And I would also suggest maybe working with the school districts so that they also do the changeover at the same time you do, thereby you have an economy of scale. I know in Los Angeles Unified School District and the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority, they all went, oh my gosh, I want to say 10, 15 years ago to CNG vehicles and did away with the diesels completely. Huge, huge difference.
Yes.
So
we've got the EV, we've got the CNG model, 70 miles down the road. So we could always, when everybody, this COVID thing is over, schedule a tour of the GRTC facility, and you would be able to see what the CNG model looks like.
Right.
But I think it is potentially a bridge, but not it's not a temporary bridge. It's a bridge that allows us to get our carbon footprint, but also have the reliability factor that we need.
If you need any information on if you need any information or any context, I still have contacts with the MTA. I was on that board as an alternative board member. Perfect. And also LA Unified School District and what they did. So I can get you any information you want.
Okay, perfect.
So this is probably would be a great agenda item for us in the future. I'm not sure exactly the timing, but it certainly would be a great agenda item to talk about. So any other comments or questions on the optional suggestions? I think activity 4 and activity 5. Some of you might want to jump in here at this point. Peter or Nikaya, anyone have any thoughts? You okay? I will say that for me, I think trying a virtual peer city could be fascinating. I think it's always good to see what other people are doing, and it would be a great exercise. Though for me, I would really like to try that. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but it would be fun. And I would really like to see us have some work around our climate action plans, as well as housing policies. I think to have some discussions around affordable housing and transit. We have an affordable housing partnership in this community, regional housing, affordable housing partnership. Might be great to have them come and meet with us at some point and talk about their work and how we all connect. So I guess with that, are there any other comments or questions? Neil, you haven't said anything. Are you good?
No, I'm fine. I know we didn't want to talk about the alternative vehicles completely, but I would just say that the state really does want what you were talking about here a little bit is looking at plans. What would be regional plans in place, put something in place. And so the technology is certainly changing every year. And, but we really encourage that because we just don't want somebody to get a vehicle of either natural gas or hybrid or electric, and then say we're getting this to test it, but really is there a local regional dedication to that in the long run? And I know that's probably to us very vital. And Jennifer Mitchell, our director, has said that because there is a large increase of capital costs of these vehicles, we are looking. We probably will be this year. Some areas came in funding those with our normal 68% state funding. So we do, we do see this as future. City of Alexandria, I think, has decided to go completely electric. So they would be somebody to look at, and probably they actually have a few different manufacturers of electric buses, but the big part is getting to the smaller buses. And as few have said, that's not quite there yet for procurement. We hope by this time next year we would, as a state, be able to bid something out for that.
Great. Thank you very much, Neil. Okay, any other comments or questions? If not, we'll move on, I guess. Jessica?
Can I ask a quick question, Diane? Sorry to interrupt. Just to make sure that we ensure that staff has really good direction for coming to you in the next meeting. Are there any of those activities or sub-activities that we can say we can eliminate for now? It might not be the right time. We can push that into FY23, because I would love for them to be able to build out a more detailed scope for some of these for you to talk about in April. So for example, I was being mindful of what Garland said, that they're in an RFP process for your passenger counters, and that could be 8 to 10 months. Would it make sense to push the ridership reporting project into FY23 once we have better data to be able to work with? And are there any others that you all have thoughts on that, like, hey, this is great, but maybe this isn't the right time to do it? Here are the priorities that we have for this upcoming fiscal year.
I think pushing that ridership, it seems like to me, based on what we've heard from Garland, I think that makes sense. Is there anybody that doesn't agree or thinks differently? I think that
I agree.
timing would be better for that. Obviously, we can't do everything. Right. And we have a committee that's working on the equitable driving appreciation piece. Maybe we need to let that group have an opportunity to, because I was on that committee and we haven't met with COVID for a long time. So maybe we need some time to get back onto that particular. I know it's really important, but it might be good to give some time for that committee to do some work and push that one off a little bit. Is there any thoughts around that, or?
And when you say that, Diantha, you mean push that off or actually make that a priority for that committee to complete that work in this upcoming year?
Well, I would say that the committee needs to get back together and make that a priority, but that would be the committee right now. I know it's part of the work plan, but
okay.
It is a subgroup, right?
Yep.
Does that make sense? I mean, I think. Yeah, I see Karen nodding her head. She was a part of that group as well.
Yeah, Diantha, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you remind me who is on that committee?
Well, I was thinking it was myself and Brad, and Christine, somebody help me with this, and Jim Foley and Garland and Becca.
Okay.
That may have been it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct, Diantha.
Yeah. Oh, wow. My brain actually. All right. So just thinking that it to give some time for that committee to get back together and do some work might be appropriate. I do think there was some energy though around connections with the city and the county and our climate action plans. There was work connections. I didn't hear anybody push back when I suggested the affordable housing piece. That worked perhaps, Christine, with the housing policy, because we all know you're not going to have affordable housing if you don't have transit, right? We've got to connect somehow or another. And I may have been the only one that mentioned I'd love to try a peer virtual tour of another city, but maybe, is there any nodding of heads that might be at least to try one and see how it goes? I mean, is there any interest in that? Lloyd's nodding.
I have no idea what it actually involves, but what the heck?
I just think it's always good if we can take a look at what other communities are doing,
Right.
Successful communities are doing, successful transit communities. Gets us out of our own silo a little bit,
I like it a lot. I'm gonna be honest. We are looking at doing a kind of a on call with Kimberly Horn to do a kind of a peer review for CAT anyway. That's a necessary component for us to, as we start to build out, ask for more for our alternative fuel vehicles and our facilities. We need to see how we match up as we're starting to ask for more capital projects. So it's going to be a necessary component for us to do anyway.
So you could use this one as part of that, right? That would help you.
Well,
Maybe.
Maybe. So I would just say Ben Chambers from Kimberly Horn is actually as one of the attendees that's sitting out there. He and I and the team we've been working through, there are a few studies we're trying to get done, but this is a kind of a critical component for us because it allows us to measure ourselves and it allows the state to see where we're potentially deficient in like our capital needs. So that is why we're doing the project. And it fits into kind of the peer review things that we're talking about virtually here. As we're asking for potentially a permanent location, like a park and ride up on 29, that's going to be kind of a review for kind of what does our overall footprint look like and how we're building out. Does it make sense to do that as compared to other transit agencies similar to our size? So we're already going to have to do that component to make it happen. So it kind of fits into kind of the virtual review component here.
Okay. Christine, does that help, dear? Yeah. A B. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to ask Garland, are you looking for your park and ride up in the area of, well, it was former Defense, but it's now called North Point up there?
So
I mean, they're really building out up there.
So I will just say, what we don't want to do is give the developers a chance to grab the pieces of property from us that we're looking at. So we're having conversations behind the scenes right now. We've had general conversations with Trevor and Kevin and the team, and I think it was a great one. We need to do more about that. But I think long-term, the study is going to help us to determine whether the feasibility is there to do it first, and then we can kind of hone in on where it potentially could be. The purpose would be, to create that model where we get better dedicated service up on 29, facilitate movement down into the university. I think it helps the region to make this kind of model happen.
And that would be certainly something that might come from some of these visioning plans as well.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I'm keeping track of the time. I just don't want us to lose track of the time. Christine, are you, does that answer, has that helped? Are you good, Jessica? Are you?
Absolutely. That gives us a lot to go back with and build out some of these ideas.
Yeah.
This is perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Lucas, did you have something you wanted to say or you just, okay. All right, just trying to keep my timekeeper's hat on here. So then let's move on because Sandy has a couple of agenda items that she needs to walk us through and I believe one of them is an item we need to vote on.
Actually, I don't think so. Maybe you did at one point, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I had a mark that thought I needed to vote, but that's okay. Then.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Let me go ahead. I'm going to share my screen here. So, and for those of you, let's see. For those of you that attended that MPO meeting last night, some of this will be a little bit repetitive, but I think we'll put a different spin on it for you all. So there are two things I wanted to mention. One of the goals that we have right now is to make sure that we are thinking about transportation as a system and making sure that as we do go through our planning process and go through our project identification and things like that, that we're making sure that we are considering how all of the different types of transportation, modes of transportation interact with each other to help us meet the regional goals for how people move throughout the urbanized area. So one of the goals that I have personally is just to make sure that we are bringing all the information to all the right people so that they can be invested and be engaged in the process and provide different perspectives that we need to consider to make sure that we're doing this well. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, as Jessica mentioned, is the Unified Planning Work Program that the MPO develops each year. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the little details about how the MPO is funded, we get a majority of our funding from federal sources based on our population for our urbanized area. So 80% of the funding for the MPO comes from the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. That's matched by a 10% contribution from the state agencies, VDOT and DRPT, And then we get an additional 10% from local match. So that's county contributions and city contributions that go to the PDC to be used for our local match requirements. So one of the things that we're required to do as a recipient of this funding is to develop a work program that highlights all of the different activities that we're going to be undertaking using this funding. To give you an idea, the MPO budget for our urbanized area for FY22 is $320,000, give or take. And then the other thing I want to mention is that if you look at the actual Unified Planning Work Program document, you'll see that there's an additional line item that says VDOT SPR funding. That is funding that does not go through the MPO. That is funding specifically for VDOT to provide staff to support the MPO and to assist us with projects. So that's in addition to the $320,000 that we receive. The MPO met last evening and they voted on developing the initial draft that we're going to prepare for public review and comment at the MPO meeting in May. So this is just a summary of what is included in that MPO work program. So you'll see that the first task is that administration task, which is very similar to the administration task that Jessica went through with you for the RTP work program. That's just the administration component, things that we have to do to keep the program running and operational and make sure that we're complying with all of the requirements. That includes our meeting operations and staffing, and it includes invoicing, it includes making sure that we're completing reports and sharing information, that kind of thing. I'm going to actually skip down to task 3 because those are also pretty standard kinds of things that we know that we're going to need to be developing and devoting staff resources to. So the first one, TIP, that's the Transportation Improvement Plan. That basically is once we know what funding is allocated, this is the plan that shows where that money is going throughout our region. So we have the long range plan that identifies our priority projects. The TIP is the plan that tells you which of those projects have been funded and tells us when we're going to see funding to make sure that those projects are implemented. So we know we're going to have to, that's a requirement that we maintain that plan. So we know we're going to have to do that, and we need to make sure that that's included in our work program. Smart Scale is a biannual process. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but one of the things that the MPO identified as being a priority for them was enhancing and improving the Smart Scale public engagement process to make sure that there are applications that are getting reviewed by the public early on. And so we know we're going to have to support that basically every year. This line item right here, this next line item under task 3, the RTP, TDM, and bike ped support is really important for you all. So this is kind of the line item that supports alternative modes of transportation, including the Regional Transit Partnership, travel demand management, and bike ped support. The reason this is really important is that one of the requirements in the memorandum of understanding that was signed when the Regional Transit Partnership was first formed is that there would be a standing funding line item in the MPO's Unified Planning Work Program to continue to provide staffing support for the RTP. So that's something that we need to make sure is reflected in our work program every year. And then we also have some of these other programs that we're required to complete. We have to provide documentation and set performance targets each year based on safety, pavement, bridge condition, things like that. We're required to do that as an MPO. We have the option to either adopt state targets or to adopt local targets, but it is something that we're required to report on. Regional Transit and Rail Planning provides staffing support to provide planning, go to meetings, prepare grant applications for things that are more interregional in nature, like supporting Amtrak station improvements and attending meetings and conferences related to that. And then this last item under task 3 is really about public outreach and engagement. And we also included staffing our Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee here. So task 3 and task 1 are pretty standard. The projects might be a little bit different. The specific work might be a little bit different, but those basic items are going to show up in the work program year after year. So task 2 is really where we start working on some of the more local identified priority projects. One of them that some of you may already be familiar with is this Route 29 North Corridor study. What we are doing is looking at the portion of 29 in the northern portion of Albemarle County, starting at Airport Road and going up to Ruckersville, basically in Greene County, and looking at the transportation corridor and evaluating operations, establishing a vision for that, and looking at how we can make recommendations for improvements throughout the area to help achieve those transportation goals. So we're looking at that. One of the goals that we have is to make sure that we are taking a multimodal perspective to integrate things like transit, like bike ped infrastructure, to make sure that we're not just evaluating intersections, but we're also looking at how we can best integrate the need for additional modes of transportation throughout that corridor. We're also going to be putting together a scope of work for the long-range transportation plan, which has to be updated every 5 years. That's a requirement for the MPOs. We're going to be doing a strategic plan. And then what's really interesting about your discussion tonight is that in the memo you received, this next line item was kind of a to be determined project. We weren't really sure exactly what was going in there, but we had a discussion with the MPO policy board last night. And they decided that one of the things that they would like us to be focusing on for that line item was integrating some of the local climate action initiatives into our transportation planning process. So that's what they selected. So it sounds like there might be some really good opportunities to do some collaboration and think about how we can be integrating, the focus for the MPO was really looking at what are best practices for making sure that climate action goals are factored in when we're prioritizing and selecting and planning specific infrastructure process. But at this point, it sounds like there might be some synergy around doing this a little bit more broadly. And so I think our staff will probably be discussing maybe if there's an opportunity to look for some synergy or some opportunities for overlap and see if we can really be as efficient and as effective as possible with using our resources to meet all the goals. But the MPO Policy Board did vote to allocate $30,000 to researching best practices for how we could do that well. Our main focus will be on our long-range transportation plan, just because that is the plan that the MPO produces. So it makes the most sense that we would start there, since as far as implementation, we won't have the same opportunities to provide the implementation on the ground as the localities or transit providers would, or UVA as well. But we can start thinking about how do we build in a prioritization for the environmental considerations into how we evaluate projects and what rises to the top. And then we have an additional $20,000 that was set aside for a future project to be determined. So that's currently reflected in that on-call services budget line item, where there's some flexibility on how that gets used in the future. And we also would have the opportunity to potentially roll that into a new fiscal year if there wasn't something that came up this time around. So that basically is just what I wanted to make sure that that you all are aware that we go through this process. The next steps in the UPWP adoption is going to be that we will be advertising this for a public hearing at the MPO meeting in May. And that's when they're going to be voting to adopt the plan as the formal work program for next year. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those at this point.
Okay, folks, questions for Sandy? Any thoughts or questions? It's actually, oh, Peter, yes.
Sandy and Diantha, if this question's off topic, let me know and I'll investigate it elsewhere. But I know the federal government's looking at changing the definitions of SMAs I don't know if that's going to impact Charlottesville, Albemarle, if we categorize as 100,000 in our urban area, and or if that impacts the MPO funding.
Do you want me to answer that, Diane?
Yes, if you can, that'd be great.
Okay.
I know what he's referencing, but you might just let everybody know in case some people are not sure what Peter's referencing.
Sure. So the question is about there's some discussion right now about changing the definition of a metropolitan statistical area, which is basically a census designation. Currently Charlottesville is designated as an MSA, a metropolitan statistical area, and the definition for that is that it has a population of 50,000 people or more, and so there is some effort to change the definition of that, going from 50,000 to 100,000. So what we understand right now is that MPO funding, at least for the transportation programs, is not likely to be impacted at this time because, and it gets a little bit sticky, but basically a lot of the authorizing legislation and the federal regulations are defined based on urbanized area versus metropolitan statistical area. However, there are a lot of different places where this could be a factor. And so one of the things that we're trying to support is just holding off until better research can be done to indicate what the potential impacts could be. We don't think it's going to, at least in the immediate future, we do not think that it's going to have a direct impact on transportation funding though.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I know we talked about that at the board level, and the county staff folks were trying to look into this as well as to what the negatives and the positives could be. Right? So
Sure.
that was helpful. Thank you, Sandy.
Mm-hmm.
So going back then to questions, any other questions about what Sandy's presented? And I guess, Sandy, I was confused because I saw staff is requesting that the committees vote on the projects they would like to include. So that vote is for later. We're not talking about anything having to vote tonight. That confused me. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I apologize. We were using the same materials for all the meetings, and it did not occur to me that the MPO policy board would be meeting before this meeting tonight. Okay. So my apologies for that.
It's okay. I just was wanting to make sure we didn't need to vote or something. Okay, on it. All right. So information.
If you have any feedback, I'd still be very happy to hear it.
Okay. So any opportunity to offer feedback? Going. I think it all sounds very exciting, to be perfectly honest with you. And I really like the closer information flow for all of us. I think this is really very helpful and I appreciate it. Okay, so you had another one, right?
I do, yeah. So let me share my screen again. And Jessica had mentioned as well, one of the things that we also want to make sure we're doing a good job about is integrating transit considerations into our applications for funding. And that includes Smart Scale. I will mention just very, very high level to you all. This will be, Jessica's already been talking to the folks at DRPT about doing a presentation about specifically opportunities for the transit providers. We did confirm that both JAUNT and CAT are eligible to apply for Smart Scale projects outside of the localities. So they each are eligible to submit their own applications as well. And there are opportunities for them to apply for support, to get technical assistance to prepare applications. So we'll give you more information as well. But I think one of the things I also want to make sure that we're doing is that we're sharing all of the resources that are available with, as broadly as possible to, again, support the entire transportation system network operating, as efficiently as possible with a variety of modes. But what I want to talk about more specifically tonight is the new Smart Scale process that the MPO is going to be going through for this next round of Smart Scale applications. And again, for those of you who might not be as familiar, Smart Scale is the Virginia state process that uses a competitive scoring criteria to select transportation projects to receive state funding. So in this last round, round 4, we were very successful in getting a large amount of funding. A lot of that was because we had additional funding due to additional support through the omnibus bill that we won't typically have. But among the projects that we were able to get support for was the improvements to a hydraulic in 29, including a pedestrian and bike crossing at the Zan Road area. So we were pretty excited about that. But there were also other bike facilities and things like that. I think the hydraulic project was especially important because it showed a lot of collaboration and consideration for integrating multiple modes of transportation into the project. The MPO is able to submit 4 projects, at least if the technical guidance doesn't change before the next round. And the MPO, in order to submit their projects, the projects must meet some eligibility requirement. So the first is that they have to meet a need that's identified in VTrans. VTrans is the statewide transportation plan. And basically, if it's not a need on VTrans, we're not going to be eligible to submit it, and it's not going to get funded. The second is that it has to either meet a need on a corridor of statewide significance. Again, this is just for the MPO to submit the project, not for localities. So the corridor of statewide significance would be projects like on US 29 or 64, and then or it could be in the regional network. VTrans, that state plan, defines the regional network and tells us if a project would meet a need there or not, but usually those are based more on improving travel and meeting transportation needs for traveling within a localized region, and it also is what supports a lot of the multimodal efforts. So one of the criticisms we heard in the previous round of smart scale applications was that projects were getting way too far into the process of applications being submitted without there being public engagement. And so we were getting to the end where pre-application was already submitted, getting really negative public feedback, or realizing there were a lot of concerns that still needed to be figured out, and then having to pull the project back at a date when it was really too late to sort of change what was included in the project or apply for a different project. And so we took that really to heart, and we developed a different process for smart scale that helps us get out in front of it pretty far, and will help us do this public engagement up front so that there is time to make sure that we're incorporating the public interest and needs and considerations into the applications before they get submitted, initially, even for the pre-application. So right now, this is just a little timeline that shows the general process. We're in these initial discussions in March. And so what happened is that I met with the city and county staff, as well as our VDOT representative, to just identify an initial list of potential projects that we might be interested in moving forward for a smart scale application. So between March and May, really, generally April, what we would like to do is we would like to receive additional project requests beyond the initial list that we were requested. And so we're giving this opportunity to consider additional projects to the local governing bodies. So the elected officials, you all will be, your staffs will be coming to you to discuss if there are other projects or if there's a prioritized project within the list that we've already prepared that you want to continue for us to pursue. But we're also going to let our Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, our technical committee for the MPO, and you all as well, bring our attention to any additional projects that you might want us to submit. And so we would ask for you to, for this group, you can have those discussions in April. And if your committee wants to vote on additional projects to consider, you would have that opportunity at your meeting in April. And so then in May, we would develop a finalized list of project requests. So we would take all the projects that staff has already discussed, all the projects that the committees have discussed, and all the projects that the local governments have discussed. And we would create that finalized list in May. And then in July, we're going to ask the MPO Policy Board to make a project selection. Initially, we're going to ask them to choose 4 projects total because that's the number of applications that we think we're going to have. And of those 4 projects, we're going to ask them to identify 2 projects that they think need this higher level of engagement. So at that point, we'll be facilitating a public engagement process. We'll get an advisory committee appointed based on the project. That will depend on who makes sense for the advisory committee. And then we'll begin at meeting with the advisory committees in September or October. In March, what we're going to do, so this is March of fiscal year 22, so a year from now, what we're going to do is we're going to collaborate with the City of Charlottesville, with Albemarle County, and develop a public workshop to just go through the entire list of projects in our area. We did this this last cycle. It was very successful to give the public a chance to ask questions. That still gives us an opportunity, about a 2-month period. If we need to make tweaks or revisions based on that public feedback, we would still have a little bit of a chance to do that before we submit pre-applications in May. So that's the general process that we're going through. It is a very long, drawn out process, but I think it will be a much better opportunity for there to be public engagement and meaningful feedback. So before, well, I'll just go through and we can go back to the slides if I need to. So when I met together with the other staff members, there were a couple of criteria that we used to identify what the potential project opportunities might be. So the first is that we wanted to make sure that the project met a defined need based on our existing long-range transportation plan. If you haven't looked at the long-range transportation plan, it has a really long list of projects. And of those, there are some projects that are on a short list called a constrained list, and there are some projects that are on a longer list called a vision list. It didn't really matter which one the project was on. We just needed to make sure it was in at least one of those lists. The second criteria we looked at was that it was multi-jurisdictional. So the project will improve transportation system operations for both Charlottesville and Albemarle. We also wanted to build on previous plans or studies that were completed. So we wanted to continue to move projects from the planning phase to the implementation phase. And that also helps us reduce the need for additional technical support to get a project ready for an application. And the last thing kind of builds on that previous plan or study, and that's that we wanted there to be some level of public support for the project. So based on that criteria, we have this initial list of projects that we wanted to mention initially to go through and discuss. So this is the list that we have developed with staff. The District Avenue Roundabout and Hillsdale Avenue Extension both showed up as being on that shorter list in the long-range transportation plan, so the higher priority ones. And these were identified through the Hydraulic 29 small area planning process. Hillsdale Avenue Extension is basically an extension from Hillsdale Avenue down to 250 to make a direct connection. That was actually submitted out as an application in the most recent round of Smart Scale. And out of 20 projects that were funded, that was project number 21. So it scored pretty well considering that it didn't get funded, but that is an opportunity. And the District Avenue Roundabout is the only other project on the constrained list that met all the other criteria, being multi-jurisdictional in nature. There's also been a lot of, there's been a feasibility study that Jessica worked on, looking at potential crossing options for pedestrians and bikes across the Ravenna River. So that's another potential option. And then there have also been some corridor studies that were recently completed on Avon Street and 5th Street. So that's the initial list. The 29-250 improvements in blue, those were brought up later by our VDOT district engineers being a potential opportunity for us to do some improvements that would meet a critical need based on VDOTs. So I think one really important thing to consider for this group is that there might be some other projects that are more transit specific that you would like us to also include in the mix, and we'd be happy to add those. But I also think that regardless of which projects we submit, it's really important for this group to be engaged to make sure that we are considering where there might be additional transit operations or changes in operations to make sure that we're building those into our applications. And then the only other thing that I want to mention, just in case it comes up in conversation, is that there has been a lot of conversation from UVA planning staff, the City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County about how much they would like to see the Sunset Fontaine connector happen. And I just want to mention, it has been brought up in discussion, but at this point, there are a lot of engineering obstacles that would have to be overcome. So we're aware of it. We'll look at opportunities to study it. But right now, it doesn't seem likely that we would be able to develop a feasible application to submit for that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions related to Smart Scale.
Thank you, Sandy. That was a lot of information. Just for my benefit and maybe for other people's as well. So we're talking about projects that would be submitted through the MPO.
Correct.
But the county and the city still have the ability to submit their own projects, just so everybody remembers that piece. And I can't honestly remember how many. But this does not rule out the city and the county submitting their own projects. Okay, so B.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, for that presentation. That was very informative. And what I was wondering is if we are coordinating with Albemarle County in Charlottesville regarding their projects to make sure there aren't any crossovers. Because if we have one and you're doing the same one or thinking of the same thing, then we would let you have it. And we could have another one. But I mean, just to make sure that if that coordination is taking place.
Yeah, I had some initial conversations with planning staff and transportation staff from both localities to start off with. That's how we created this list. I actually just emailed Kevin and Dan today to say, like, hey, of any of these projects, do you foresee that the county would want to provide or apply for any of these on their own, or do you see all of these being potential MPA projects? So we're communicating with the staffs, and hopefully that will get translated to them communicating with you all.
Right, because you initially said that you were mainly focused on 29 and 64, but the other projects there I see are, in fact, there's one in there, it said District Avenue Roundabout. Where is that?
That was part of the hydraulic 29 small area plan. So it's basically just to the west of the hydraulic 29 intersection, a little bit northwest of that. And
I can just quickly speak to that because I was on that panel. And the Hillsdale extension, which is, of course, in the city, that is where if you think about Kmart, that's the roundabout location down there. And that extension would go to the 250 bypass. And then the District Avenue is up where you would enter Stonefield.
I see. Got it.
Those two projects, and Sandy can correct me if I'm wrong, but those two projects complete the package of hydraulic projects, and in a way were built to work with what we're doing at the hydraulic intersection to make it all flow smoothly.
Right.
And we just couldn't submit them all at one time, but
and
the rest of that package.
Right. And I remember that presentation where Hillsdale would go all the way through the Kroger and onto 250. So yes. Okay. Thank you.
And just to clarify, we're focused on meeting needs that relate to the corridors of statewide significance or the regional network. So I verified that all of these projects meet either of those criteria for the MPO to make the application.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? So Sandy, I don't think you need anything from us today. This was for information.
Right. The only thing is I need you to be thinking about whether or not there are any additional projects you would like the MPO to be considering.
Okay. And we have time to bring those back at the next meeting? Email you.
Yep.
And we could discuss them at the next meeting, right?
Yep. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? I see Trevor's going to sign off. A few people have left. We have Jim Foley who has joined us. And Jim, I said that we would get back to you if you were able to join us on the Albemarle County Schools school and bus service update. Garland was able to update us on Charlottesville Public Schools, but would you like to have a few minutes to update us on Albemarle County?
Sure. Just real quick,
Yeah.
we're doing some hiring. We're trying to hire more drivers. I know Garland is too. And then we're having a lot of traffic at our schools because we're limiting students to 1 student per seat. So consequently, we cannot handle all the parents that want to put their kids on a school bus, which results in lots of traffic that backs up into the roads. So we've done a few things to get the traffic off the road, but the last big one is over at Brownsville. So it backs up onto 250 for quite a long time, but we're working on that. We'll see if we can solve that. But those are the big things I'm working on. We just started what we call stage 4. So we have probably a little more than a third of our students actually in school now. So that's about it.
That's a positive, I think.
Yeah, no, we want to get them.
Yep.
We want to get them there.
Yep.
And then hopefully, next school year, we'll be able to go back to normal, I hope.
Yeah. All right. Any questions for Jim about Albemarle County Public Schools transportation and where they are? I really want to take the opportunity to really thank all the transit providers, whether it's CAT, JAUNT, all of you guys, Charlottesville and Albemarle Public Schools. You all have really done a wonderful job during COVID and taken good care of our community, good care of your drivers. And I just want to express appreciation. I know that everybody at this meeting is very appreciative of all the hard work, and surely our residents are as well. So
thank you very much for saying that, Diantha.
Well, I mean, it's really been challenging, and transit has really had as hard a challenge as any, to be honest with you. But
I would like to say thank you also. I mean, the team here works hard every day. It's not one of those jobs where you can telework. So you've got to come in and sit behind the seat. So we really are appreciative of it. And I would just say the communication between CAT, John, UTS has been wonderful in the spirit of time. Marked improvements, and we're going to continue down that path. But transit is a major infrastructure component here. And it's you really see it during this pandemic. So
right. Well, and I will say, as someone who was on this board, and some of the rest of you were when we started a few years ago, we've come a long ways, folks, with communication. And so I'm just really, really impressed. But thank you for taking good care of your drivers and taking care of our community. So it was really good. And with that, I don't know that we didn't have any other business. I hate to let you all dismiss or let you all go 10 minutes early. We could probably talk and fill the time.
I just want to mention
work session at 6. So
I just want to mention one thing. It's only going to take 5 minutes. So Neil Sherman, if you'll help me with this, is that Neil and I talked last week, Neil? Or maybe a week before us. I don't know. Last week about the funding change with STP funding that's coming down to the region, how it's going to affect smaller transit agencies, not necessarily the larger transit agencies. If you will just can you give the team here just a little more information on that?
We've been saying this for a year that we don't have the federal funding that the small urbans, we were able to flex over the money that we control. So we did want the small urbans to know that this year that we're not sure how much, we are looking to see what we have available. We'll have some. And when the STIP goes out in April, but this is going to be a future problem. There's not a cure for it right now. I mean, we've increased, certainly on the great part, we've increased state funding 68% across the board. So these are things that localities are going to have to consider, whether to, in this particular year, use part of your stimulus cares or whatever, or in the future, put aside some of the 5307, which was what everybody had to do years ago. until we were able to do this. And so, I mean, it is something that the agency were aware of. Obviously we've been, letting the transit systems know this for about a year. But I don't know how bad it's going to be this year, but I think for the future that's the big concern. But as a state agency, we are looking at some other alternatives, whether there's another funding source we could use or something like that. There are options of which are difficult sometimes, discretionary funding for capital that some of the systems may have to start looking at a little more seriously, and things like that. So I think it's just one of those. We were able to get program more state money, but it is an issue of where some localities maybe in the future coming up with 32% match, whether they take that from 5307. Or they look at some other things. So it is, I don't know if it's going to be that terrible this year, but I think for the future, it certainly is going to be a big question unless something changes differently on some of the funding sources.
So Neil, let me just frame this a little bit so that I make sure I understand, because Garland and I had this discussion as well.
Mhm.
So what's happened is at the federal level, the previous administration changed the funding stream, or the way that I think that
I wouldn't really say it was a fund that's previous administration. I would say more it's a process of monies that comes to the state and how the state wants.
Well,
to
they
use it.
changed that process.
Right, and I'm
And
not
at the end of the day,
specifics of that.
Let me just finish and make sure.
Yeah.
At the end, because we're running out of time. At the end of the day, what it means is the locals are going to have to cough up more money
Right.
for our
Theoretically,
capital,
yes.
right?
Right.
And the state at this point, I believe I understood from Garland, has found maybe some hold harmless money, possibly for this year, but we're going to have to be dealing with it, if not later rather than sooner, maybe.
Well, it'll be, the draft will be out in middle April, and so I can't really state what that looks like now, even though I've seen some versions of it. But yeah, I think it's a concern for the upcoming years, to be honest, and maybe not as bad as this year, but it is certainly something that we'll probably over the summer try to do some meetings with all the smaller urbans, because it does involve all of them.
So what I suggested to Garland when we talked about it, and again, I'm trying to get us out here on time.
Yeah.
What I suggested was that it might be helpful if the city council and the board of supervisors, I think Garland, we talked about a letter to go to city council and the board of supervisors, that you would provide us a letter to send to the right people, right? To advocate for
additional funding. So I think that's it may be an appropriate way to go, but I would also say that long-term, as transit agencies of our size try to become bigger transit agencies, the capital component is a major infrastructure impediment and hurdle that we've got to figure out how to close that hole.
Right.
If the numbers are Neil sounds like this year is it's almost there's going to be a small impact or maybe no impact, but in the future, as CAT or JAUNT looks, Karen's looking to do a facilities improvement, and we're looking to do a facilities improvement, that local jurisdiction is going to have to pick up a lot more of that cost.
Yeah.
Right.
So the only suggestion I would wait on, not to tell you not to write a letter or something like that, but I would certainly wait to see the draft come out in the middle of April to see.
Sure, that's fine.
And say this is an understanding. Again, that all the SIP hearings will probably be Zoom anyway, but you all have an opportunity there will be public hearings this spring, but it may be it's definitely we're not hiding. We want to just be on people's radars that we need to look at things, and again, the agency itself will probably try to look at some things, and we were able to come across this money years ago, or to get this flow moving, and so but we do a good, I think what happens, we do a good job of monies that are not being used, unused balances, things like that, roll that in. But it is a little different. And again, each state does it differently too. So it's hard to compare states on it. But
Right.
The other thing Garland and I talked about was this might be something that the City Council and Board of Supervisors might want to look at with our next upcoming legislative packet.
yeah,
As dealing with and communicating to our representatives in Congress, right?
right.
Yes. So that needs to be on our radar screen. Garland, thank you for bringing that up. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'll just say, I would just say that the state's been wonderful. So Neil and the team have been wonderful trying to learn us and trying to close that gap, but they aren't going to be able to do it for so long. So,
Right.
It is an issue 2 years from now.
Right.
So,
Right. And I was shocked when Garland gave me a couple of examples of what it might mean when we're talking about capital and the difference.
Yeah.
It's pretty significant and pretty scary.
Yeah.
Okay, I see Lloyd needs to go. It is 6 o'clock. Want to get everybody to their next meeting or to dinner, wherever they might be going, or to their children. So hearing no objections, I believe that we will rejoin on, I don't have the date in front of me. It's not on, is it April Christine, are you looking April where am I here on the?
I believe it's the 22nd.
Okay, so we will reconvene on April the 22nd. And in the meantime, everyone have a lovely spring. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.